This is my journey to becoming a clinical psychologist in the UK. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new, my name's Francis. I'm about to start my clinical psychology training at the University of Oxford. So this video is going to be the first of many about how I got to this point and advice from the application process. Obviously, there isn't one foolproof path to getting into this field, but if you are thinking about it, then I hope you can take something away from these videos. So firstly, what is a clinical psychologist? I'm going to make a video explaining it in more detail at some point, clarifying the difference between a clinical psychologist and other types of psychologist or psychotherapist. But to keep it short, a clinical psychologist is someone who works with people from every corner of society: children, working adults, older adults, people with intellectual disabilities, and so on. They work with a whole range of conditions like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, neurological disorders, and many more. They conduct assessments to try and formulate or explain a given person's presenting difficulties. They work on the individual level with whole families, as part of teams with other healthcare professionals, and they also work with other parts of the community like social care, schools, GPs and A&E. Finally, on a broader level, they help to develop psychological services and conduct clinical research. Now, in the UK, to be able to call yourself a clinical psychologist, you need to complete a doctorate in clinical psychology, which is known as a DClinPsy, DClinPsych, ClinPsy-D. Why there's so many abbreviations? Not sure. But these are 3-year courses that take place at 30 universities across the UK. You can find them all on the Leeds Clearinghouse website, which is where you apply from. They're fully funded by the NHS, so if you're a domestic student, you get paid to do it. And after you complete this training, you are a qualified clinical psychologist. So working backwards from the point I'm at now, about to start training, what do you need to get onto the doctorate? What was my experience that got me onto the doctorate? Let's start by taking it back. When I was a little boy, I was discovered abandoned at the side of a lake, wrapped up in a blanket, shivering in the cold. Some charitable passers-by noticed me and decided to take me in. They welcomed me into their family. Now, it was an unconventional family. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of near disasters, but day by day, we bonded, and eventually they were able to find and reintegrate me with the community I was born in. And so I was able to build the foundation to navigate the world and find my way to where I am today. And that was the plot of Ice Age. What a film. I'd say for me, actually growing up and talking in the broadest possible terms, knowing people with mental health difficulties growing up who have used services that involve clinical psychologists got my mind ticking about what it'd be like to get into the field. And so the real relevant starting point for me was A-levels. I didn't actually do psychology A-level because my school didn't offer it, and you also don't need it to get into psychology university. So my A-levels were actually maths and further maths, computing, and philosophy, so a little bit different from usual. I got psychology related experience outside of A-levels during year 12 and 13. The summer before year 13, I shadowed in the Employee Health and Wellbeing Department at a hospital in Manchester. They had psychotherapists and organisational psychologists for the people working in the hospital. And I also spent a bit of time in the hypnotherapy department, which I didn't know actually existed in the NHS, but people with IBS can actually benefit from gut-focused hypnosis. So I briefly shadowed some of that. During year 13, I did an EPQ, an extended project qualification, which is a 5,000 word report and presentation about anything you want. So I wrote about the psychology of imprisonment. In particular, I looked at reoffending rates in prisons across the world, for example, comparing US prisons with Scandinavian prisons. Very interesting to read about. I also went to a few taster events for psychology organised by universities. So I visited Nottingham for a few days and Cambridge for a couple of days too. They gave me an idea of what psychology would be like at university. So I thought, yeah, let's just do it. And by the grace of God, I got onto PBS at Cambridge. And in terms of getting onto the doctorate, you need a minimum 2-1 in undergrad psychology. It doesn't matter where you go. I actually went to a prospective applicants event for the doctorate at King's, and they said they anonymise which university you went to avoid bias, which not sure what to think about that, but essentially, as long as the course is accredited by the British Psychological Society, the BPS, it's calm. It means you can do a conversion if you didn't do psychology undergrad, and it doesn't matter what the modules specifically cover. This is a video. Oh, where's my finger? Here's a video I made about what I thought of my course. Essentially, I'd say most of it wasn't directly relevant to clinical psychology. We had a couple of seminars about getting into it as a career, but overall, my most useful experience in undergrad was research, and research is valued almost as much as clinical experience. So my final year dissertation, in a nutshell, I researched paranoia and how it could relate to a biased perception of emotions in other people's faces. As part of this study, I got to grips with the research process, doing various types of statistical analysis like correlation, regression, ANOVAs, all that jazz. But my project was good because it also involved kind of clinical skills. I conducted interviews to screen out participants with pre-existing mental health conditions, and these sorts of questionnaires or standardized outcome measures are a big part of clinical psychology. So it was nice to have this kind of under my belt a little by the end of undergrad. However, in terms of directly applying to the doctorate from this point, realistically, it wasn't on the table. I did get decent research experience and a first, but in terms of experience working directly with people, I did some active listening training at a peer-to-peer support society, and I did some teaching in China one summer, but essentially I had no clinical experience. Applying from undergrad might be on the cards if you either had a placement year as part of your degree, some experience before your degree, or you went to Hull or York specifically because their undergrad degrees have a special pipeline for you to get onto their own doctorate courses, which I only learned recently actually. Maybe I should have gone there. But in general, the doctorate courses want you to have at least a year's relevant experience. Some require less, but regardless, I definitely needed more. I thought about this in the final year of my undergrad, and that's when I decided to apply for a master's. I applied to developmental psychology and clinical practice at UCL. Well, technically, it's at an institution called the Anna Freud Center, which does a lot of research, various forms of training. It's quite a big name in clinical psychology, but they slap a UCL logo on their degrees to give them some more authority, I guess. I have student cards from both places for the course. Really gorgeous photos. Unbiased opinion, it's the best masters in the world because it's almost like the perfect precursor to the doctorate. Clinical psychology loves a bit of reflection, thinking about your work, thinking about your thinking about your work, considering perspectives from different types of therapy, and as I've mentioned before, doing both research with clinical work. DPCP is a 2-year master's. The first is purely taught. You do modules where, for example, you learn how to build and maintain therapeutic relationships through role-playing with actors, and you work on a research project and dissertation linked to mental health. In my case, I'm currently researching a peer support app and how it relates to suicidal ideation. And in the second year, which I'm about to finish, you do a couple more modules about clinical skills alongside a 3-day-a-week placement, which they organize for you. And that is why it's the best course in the world, because finding these kinds of placements outside a master's is quite difficult. And you get all of this just for the small price of... let's talk about that another time. I've actually been doing 2 placements on this course because I signed up to do an additional one. For half a day a week, I've been working at the Anna Freud School Support Service, which is a charity that gives 8-session guided self-help / CBT for anxiety and low mood. It's a remote intervention, which means we work with people from high schools across the country, particularly in areas that have poorer access to traditional services. And so having my own caseload has been a really steep but fulfilling learning curve. And then my main placement this year has been working in CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service in the NHS. I've been working in a Tier 2 service, which means that the patients don't stay overnight on wards and don't require specialist treatment. They just come for one-off assessments or screening before being signposted elsewhere for the more extended help they need. I've been involved in the triage stage where referrals come in to CAMS from schools or GPs, the assessment stage where young people will come in for a detailed chat about what's been going on for them, screening for assessment of neurodevelopmental diagnoses like ADHD and ASD. And I've also been involved in family consultation where the whole family's in the room with 2 therapists to discuss their dynamics with each other. All of this is involved working alongside clinical psychologists and other mental health professionals, as well as being supervised by clinical psychologists. And supervision is fundamental to clinical psychology. A supervision is basically a once-a-week discussion with a senior about how your work is going and thinking through any challenges that have come up or ethical issues and so on. That's been a really important space to think through my work. And it brings us to today, where I cobbled all of this information into my first DClinPsy application. At the time of applying, I still didn't have a year's relevant experience, and therefore I was ineligible to apply to a lot of the courses. But in the end, I was able to go for Sheffield, Oxford, UCL, and Edinburgh. It wasn't a perfect application because I got rejected from UCL and Edinburgh before interview. I got an interview at Sheffield, but got rejected. And then I got an interview at Oxford and got accepted. So I didn't really expect to get on this year because often people who get onto the doctorate have applied multiple times. They've had like 3, 4, 5 years of relevant experience beforehand. So bearing this in mind, when I was applying, I thought about and asked around, how can I make my application stand out? And at interview again, how can I set myself apart from people who have more experience than me? These are going to be the topic of future videos on the channel, but for now, that is the overall picture of my journey getting to this point where I'm about to start my clinical psychology training. So if you made it to the end of this video, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you are new to the channel and you want to follow my journey into clinical psychology, want some advice from the process, feel free to subscribe and turn notifications on so you never miss a video. You get a sweet notification of my face when I upload a video. And on that note, I will see you very soon with another one.